All right, we're live at Buffalo Trace Distillery for another episode of Whiskey Wednesday. Today we have Harlen Wheatley, Master Distiller, and we're going to chat about Single Oak Project and everything that's gone into it. Harlen, how you doing? And let's kick this thing off.
Doing great. We've been blessed to be able to talk about a lot of the projects we've been doing here at Buffalo Trace, and really a lot of our legacy brands and things we're working on, over the years. But we've got an experimental program here at Buffalo Trace, and it encompasses a lot of different things. We look at environment, we look at recipes, distillation techniques, all these different types of experiment. But one of probably our most aggressive and long-standing experiment was our Single Oak project, and we started that project. It's been about 15 years ago now. And we went out into the woods, and one of my good friends, Ronnie Edens, he was a warehouse manager here at the time, and he'd only been working here at the time about 40 years, had a lot of great experience. And he went out into the woods with one of our barrel suppliers, Independent Stave Company, went out into the woods and hand-selected trees. And the idea was we want to learn everything we can about the trees and how they affect the flavors of the whiskeys, how they extract wood from those, extract flavor from that wood. And we GPS marked the trees, so really we could come back later and figure out some things, and where they sat on the mountain, how much sunlight they got, what was the depth of the soil, the topsoil. And we really went in depth on these single oaks. We chose 96 different oaks. And we took 96 of those, we cut them down, we had a top half and a bottom half of that tree, and we made a barrel out of each half of the tree, so 2 barrels per tree. And then we put different recipes into those different barrels and stored them in different locations. So we had a lot of different iterations so we could fully explore how the single oak was affecting that whiskey. And so we let it age for 8 years. So this is really a 20-year experiment from start to finish. And we let it age for 8 years. And then we started sending it out to the public. And we took 4 years to get all the feedback from the public. And after the end of the 4 years, they voted online what they liked the best, which one the aromas was, mouth feel, all these different things that they liked. And the winner was barrel number 80. And this looks like all the same bottles on the shelf, but really every one of these bottles have a different flavor, and it's all based on the single oak or location and how it interacts with, because there's lots of variables, right? But how that interacts with each one of those oaks, that's what makes it really important. But number 80 was the winner, and as you can see, it's pretty popular. It's about empty here on the shelf. But so the idea at the end of those 12 years then is we went back to the woods and replicated those number 80 barrels. We cut down very similar trees in similar locations. We aged them the same way with the same recipe, and now they're aging now, and they're about 3 years old, and we're making more every year. So that way when we launch this, it'll be 8 years so about 5 years from now, we'll launch it, and it'll be the world's first single oak bourbon designed by the general public. And it's a kind of an exciting thing.
It's really, really cool. And just like I always try to do, there's a lot of folks chiming in. We've got people from North Carolina, Benton, Kentucky, Louisiana, Youngstown, Ohio, and Western Pennsylvania. So lots of folks chiming in here.
Yeah, this is actual the trees. We saved some of the trees samples that we use for the single oak project. Mm-hmm. And then of course, like I said, these are all the barrels, all the different bottles representing the barrels. We chose 3 today that we're going to taste, and I'll walk through some of the differences in these samples. But this one was, we put it on the bottle. We tried to make it small enough where we could send it out across the public. We didn't forget old Ronnie Edens, our buddy. We got RE on the back label in honor of Ronnie. But this is barrel number 117, and that one in particular was a wheat recipe. It was the top half of the tree, and it averaged ring was 14 rings per inch, which is kind of on the borderline of tight grain. And it was in our warehouse L, which generally warehouse L is one of our better warehouses for consistency across the board. So that's one of the reasons we put the wheat there, because generally we put a lot of wheat barrels in our warehouse L. But this one in particular, it's just they're all really good based on the product that we're putting in the barrel. It's a wheated bourbon, again, about an 8-year-old wheat. So as you can imagine, it's pretty good. It's a pretty good bourbon. But what we looked for was overall character in aroma, taste, finish, and all the different comments come back from the general public. And this one just didn't beat out number 80, but it was a really good one.
Yeah, Justin Howell chimes in on Buffalo Trace Distillery on Facebook and says he was able to grab bottle 82 at the gift shop, looks like just yesterday. So sometimes on Sunday. So sometimes they pop up here in the gift shop still.
Well, one of the things we did, we were smart enough. We released that after 4 years of a lot of the bottles that we had. We sold them across the country. But we were smart enough to save a few, because we want to keep people, keep it in top of mind that we have more single oak coming in the future. So we're excited about the product.
Yeah, really, really cool. And when I think about how incredible it is that between just the top half and the bottom half of the tree, where it is on the mountain, the age and the rings, it makes a big difference. And that just shows how important that barrel is to the flavor, the complexities, and how it ages.
It does. And then this second one was barrel number 14, and we changed it up. It was a rye recipe, and it was a tight grain, 18 inches, 18 rings per inch, and the bottom half of the tree. And what we found with the bottom half, generally, some people would expect that, is the bottom half of the tree would house more flavor, and it did. It proved out that the bottom half, gave it a little bit more flavor, more complexity, and it was favored. The bottom half was favored over the top half. But again, a rye bourbon. So if you were picking based on the data that we received, this middle one would rank a little bit higher than that first one.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too. I'm assuming just being closer to the soil makes a lot of difference, and close to the roots and everything like that. I know in wine, the grape, where it's grown and where that vine is, makes all the difference in the world on the wine. And I would say the same with chocolate or anything like that, tobacco.
Yeah.
So,
and for us, again, it was an experiment along with our experimental program. It supported that. So when we look at environment or we look at recipe, but this one in particular concentrated on how that tree, the environment plays a role in the tree and the way it grows, how fast it grows and all that. But the tree, after 60, 70, 80 years, on how that affects the flavor of the whiskey, which we know is one of the most important variables we have.
You've talked to me about this before, and I'm always fascinated by the what to expect when the ring widths are different, when there's less rings per inch versus more rings per inch, tighter versus loose rings.
Yeah, and when it's tighter, what happens is as the whiskey goes into the wood and comes back out of the wood, it's experiencing more of those rings per inch as it penetrates the wood. Typically, it'll penetrate maybe an 1/8 inch into the wood as it comes back out. And so you're getting the entire year worth of absorption. But what happens is, since it's tighter, it doesn't move as fast. So generally, you get more complexity. However, it takes longer to age or get the same amount of flavor. So the more coarse or bigger the rings are, it'll age a little bit faster, and it'll pick up a little bit. It'll become a little bit darker. It'll pick up a little bit more flavor. So there's a happy medium in there, of what you like for a really good bourbon.
Yeah, I think about like if you're penetrating that much, and every ring you pass is a year of that tree's life, and how complex a tight ring would be in a barrel. It's pretty fascinating.
Yep.
I'm always interested in hearing you talk about that.
One of the things we did too when we put these bottles into the box, we included a piece of the barrel for them to look at, as they enjoyed the bourbon. So.
That's really neat. So let's talk about the next one you have poured out for us.
Yeah, this last one was barrel number 47, and it was actually a wheat. We went back to wheat on this, but it was a wheat bourbon, top half of the tree, tight grain. So the main difference between this one and 117 was it was a tight grain and different entry proof. So we entered this barrel at 125, and we entered this barrel at 105. So those two things make a big difference in the speed of the aging. So as you're aging the bourbon, that lower proof will not age quite as fast as 125 proof. So you're not getting quite as much of the flavor. So again, there's a happy medium somewhere between 105 and 125 for wheated bourbons.
Very cool. Yeah, so I would expect this to have a very different flavor. Entry proof being one, but also just location of the wood.
Yeah, so we took this one basically and sped it up a little and put it in this one, but we gave it a curveball with tighter grain. So we try to balance it up, and we're just trying to learn something from each one of those. And see, for us, and I think generally that's what we saw from the feedback. Again, this is feedback from the public. It's not necessarily what we think, but this one for sure has more flavor. The depth of flavor is really good because of that, tight grain.
Okay.
And then you had the 125, so you're really picking up a lot of good flavors. This one's really good.
That's great. And what number was that one?
That was one.
Or no, 40?
47.
47.
Number 47.
Is that a rye or a wheated bourbon?
It's a wheated bourbon.
Wheated bourbon.
But at 125 with tight grain. So we had some, we're just trying to have all the different variables and look at them.
Very cool. And I'm sure there's an unlimited amount of data and learnings. Is there anything that you're kind of thinking of that was a big learning for you on this project?
Well, we confirmed a lot of things. That we confirmed that it's really important when you're building a barrel to not focus on generally just one location. We know that diversity is really important to get trees from a lot of different areas. You don't want all swamp, low land area versus all top of the mountain, because those will be a much tighter grain. So we know about diversity in the barrel, the wood selection, and then we learned about how these variables change the whiskey. So the bottom half of the tree really did produce more flavorful whiskey. It really did make a difference if you chose the top or the bottom. So again, that supports that diversity. And for us, it was just learning about how our recipes react in these different environments, because we found out that each recipe was a little bit different. And we just learned, it was a book full of knowledge out of this experiment.
Sure.
And we're not done yet, because we're making new barrels, and they're aging now, and then we're going to release them, and like I said, in about 5 years. So we're going to have a whole, new set of bourbon coming out.
Okay, and that does answer a lot of questions. Is there more coming? So I think you just answered that, especially number 80, as we kind of wait on that one. One thing that you sort of touched on it there, but I think is also really fascinating, is when it comes to a small batch bourbon, when you're trying to have something as large a scale as a Buffalo Trace versus this project, I would think the diversity in staves in your barrel is more important than a single oak barrel, right? Or
yeah, definitely.
Okay.
If we're trying to be consistent, that's one of the main things we learned is, if we're trying to be consistent with our legacy brands, what age do we want the wood to be? What depth of char, and then what type of stave, what type of wood that we want to focus on. And we're learning about regionality on how those barrels, taste and produce different whiskeys. And we're learning about, like I said, how the tree specifically reacts to the whiskey. So all those things helped us become more consistent in our legacy brands. That's the main thing.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, so lots of questions coming through. I'm trying to check them out here. Let's see. The Original Bourbon Society asks, given the dramatic increase in the number of barrels being laid down now, how are you ensuring availability of the raw materials? So I know we have a big project around here we're planting a lot of trees and things like that.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and we worry about that too. We know, not just this experiment, but just through our history, our number one raw ingredient is the white oak tree. Really important for us. You know, we're heavily involved with all the forestry management, people and departments. We're looking at lots of different ways and utilizing our, science really to understand the best type of trees and, moving forward, what's the best harvesting methods and, what's the best use of our white oak. Is it better to export that white oak or use it for Kentucky bourbon? I think some people would say Kentucky bourbon. So, a lot of that's important. And, how are we managing our forests? And, it's mostly all private landowners, so they need to understand it's an education process. So it's really important. And we know that, it takes 60, 80 years to make a really good, bourbon barrel tree. So we got to plan for the future. One of the projects that we just did was we're working at the University of Kentucky, and we planted over 1,000 white oak saplings, and we're going to watch these trees grow. They're from all over the country, different types of white oaks, and see how they grow and what we can learn from each one of those for the future. It's all about the future, and we'll see how that turns out. Yeah,
no, that's a great question. Thanks for that one. And thank you, Jeffrey. He's letting everybody know if you go to singlebarrelproject.com, you'll be able to get all the details, mash bills on the bottle you own. He has bottle 25, but singlebarrelproject.com, and you should be able to look up all the different bottles and the mash bills, the age, the ring, all that's on the website. And again, like Justin said on Sunday, he found a bottle here at the distillery, so they are out and about still. So that's great. Yeah, Jason says, I'm always learning new things from these videos. Thanks for doing them, Harlan. And okay, all right. So we're about 18 minutes, Harlan. Anything else? I'm going to kind of pick up the camera here and get a little tighter on these rings on the wood. And like you said, these are actually from the trees from the project, right?
Yes. We tried to save everything we could. We're trying to, document everything we're learning along the way. And again, it's a 20-year experiment. So at the end of it, we're going to, know a lot. Not everything. Nobody knows everything. But we're going to learn a lot about single oak and how that affects the whiskey.
We touched on this a little bit last week, but we do have a few questions about how many other types of projects like this are going on. Is there any insight to maybe what's to come or some of the experiments that you've laid down recently?
Well, we're always looking. So we're prioritizing a giant list. We've got a lot of different, but it's always focused on being very purposeful and learning how to become, really better distillers or become more consistent with what we're currently running. It's just part of our experimental program, and where we look at, like I said, not just different recipes, but processes, filtration, raw ingredients, environment, and a lot of things go into, making a consistent bourbon. So.
And really, from me, a question I've had: when was it in your career that you started really taking an extra look at barrels and wood? So when did that moment become a thing for you personally?
Well, I came in with a degree, a couple of degrees, one in chemistry and chemical engineering, and when I came in, I was curious of the history of bourbon, but really for me it was all about honoring tradition and embracing change, and that's what we say here all the time. And like I said, Ronnie Edens was the guy. When I came in 26 years ago, Ronnie was already doing experiments. He was doing some wood experiments with our different suppliers, and really all we did was continue that. I said, Ronnie, these are really interesting experiments. What happens if you do this? And so we just kept working together, and we've got a whole team of experimental people that come up with ideas and come up with different techniques and things that we want to try. So it's just exciting, for Buffalo Trace to, continue to look at the future.
Yeah, no, it's really great. And thankfully, Ronnie had that going. And,
oh, yeah.
And I'm glad that you recognized it as well and took off with it, because like you said, there's so much to learn about the tree and where it grows and how it imparts flavor into bourbon. And yeah, we know there's not, what do you say, sometimes we haven't made the perfect bourbon just yet, or?
No, not yet. We feel like there's always something better out there, and we're going to continue to look, and we're never going to be satisfied.
There you go. All right, so I'm going to scoop this up and kind of get a close-up of the bottles,
Yeah.
and come down as well. So pardon the shake here on the bottles, but just make sure everybody gets a pretty close up here. Yeah, it's pretty incredible. And on these posters that we have here, it's going to be kind of tough with all the reflections, but we do have all the information. Any standouts for you, Harlan, or was this purely a?
Well, again, I like the ones with the more flavor, the 125 proof entry, and both the wheat and the rye were really good at that proof, and I think we learned a lot about bottom half of the trees supplying more flavor. We have all these barrels in order.
That's right. So one up top, kind of got one that's scooted back there. Yeah, there's a bunch. It's really neat to see one of every one of these all together. Will the number 80, the one that you're producing the most of, will it still be a 375? Same shape bottle, I would think?
375,
okay.
Yeah.
We had that question a couple times. What size are these, and what will the more produced one be? So I'm assuming it's going to look very similar.
There's number 80, yeah. Looks like somebody's been tasting that one.
That must have been the favorite. Yeah, really
then we,
cool.
of course, went all the way to 192, so 2 barrels per tree, 96 trees.
Do you typically get more barrels out of trees?
That's kind of the average,
Okay.
a couple of barrels per tree.
Okay. All right, great. Well, thank you, Harlan.
Thank you.
Yeah, these are cool. All right. All right, we'll see everybody next Wednesday live at 2